So what do we do? So what, with the chemicals, what do we really do? The kind of common sense things that we can do here, in essence, to avoid these types of problems, if we're saying, okay, now we have these problems, Dr. Osborne, what in the heck do I do about them? So let's talk about what is the solution. Very, very simply put, the solution is read what you put in. So read labels. Read labels to avoid these things, number one. So number two, filter your air and your water. Now, if you're looking for filter options, if you're looking for my opinions on those, we can pop a link up on under the video on air and water filtration. I've got some resources for you there on some of the better air and water filters, but very, very important. Number three, women especially, look at your cosmetics. And, make sure that they're free of BPA. Make sure, here, the BPA, which can be found in cosmetics, make sure they don't contain those types of things. Make sure they don't contain Triclosan. Again, looking at those labels, calling the manufacturer, and avoiding products that contain those things. And then number four is your food. We want to eat organic. Because if you're not eating organically, you're getting exposure to lots of pesticides, and of course that can be a problem. Now, many of you that live in the city, this is one of the big things you've got to worry about. Maybe you've got a carbon filter on your water, like a lot of you may be using like a carbon water pitcher filter or a refrigerator filter where you have those are carbon filters. Those will not pull out fluoride. A lot of you are drinking that water not realizing that the water is still contaminated with fluoride. Those carbon filters do not pull out fluoride. The only type of filter that pulls out fluoride is an RO filter, reverse osmosis. So if you're in a city and you're drinking, municipal city water, and you've only got a carbon filter, which is, again, your classic pitcher or your classic refrigerator, and you're not filtering by reverse osmosis, you're exposing your thyroid gland to too much fluoride, potentially creating an iodine intake problem, and that can be a very, very big deal. That can be a very, very big problem. So get the fluoride out. I have seen this. This is probably one of the more common things I've seen when we test for fluoride toxicity. We see this extremely common in people who live in major cities. So it's also one of the things that can be done. If we're looking at what can be done, you can have a conversation with your doc. So follow up with your doctor and test, right? And you can test for the halides. You can test for these things and make sure that they're not a problem. It's very, very easy to run that type of testing and make sure that that's not the case or that that's not part of your issue. You can also test for pesticides. It's not hard to test for that. You can also test for phthalates. That's also easy to test for. So you can test for mycotoxins. So again, get with your doctor if you're really struggling and you're not responding to the traditional diet change, etc. This is a very, very simple thing that you can do. Now, one of the other things that you'd want to test for, aside from those chemicals, you want to absolutely test for iodine and other nutrients. And I'll talk about those next so that you can have that, in your arsenal of information. So test your iodine levels. You'll see a lot of this on the internet, that if you have Hashimoto's not to take iodine. I find that not to be 100% true. Where I see iodine as a problem in people with Hashimoto's is if your antibody levels are over 500. So if you've got really, really high TPO antibodies, then iodine might not be the right move for you. But if your TPO antibodies are lower than that, most people tend to tolerate iodine just fine, and it doesn't create any problems. Now, that being said, one of my other recommendations is a multi with iodine. And here's why. A lot of people don't realize this, but in 1924, the United States started to add iodine to salt. Salt being, why were we adding iodine to salt? Because goiter was epidemic in the country. If you didn't live near the coast, if you didn't eat things like seaweed, or you didn't eat a lot of seafood from salt water, you weren't getting adequate iodine in the diet because it's not very rich in vegetables. It's not very rich in other animal-based products like milk. So what happens is, the country was becoming more and more iodine deficient. Now, at the time in the 1920s, what did we use to stabilize food? In essence, what did we use as a preservative in our food? We used salt. And so the government basically mandated iodized salt. So when you look at you go to the grocery store, and you see a box of salt or a bag of salt, then generally it'll say iodized salt. That was the solution during that time, was to put iodine in the salt, because everybody used salt to preserve their food. What do we do today? We avoid salt. Most people avoid salt like the plague because of high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease and high sodium based foods. It's become a big problem, so a lot of people avoid salt altogether. So then the question becomes, where are you getting your iodine? If you're not eating seaweed and you're not eating seafood, you're going to get it from a solid multivitamin that contains iodine. My recommendation there is something like Ultra Nutrients, especially if you're on a gluten-free diet. You want something that follows the true gluten-free diet principles. Ultra Nutrients is a multivitamin that doesn't have all the garbage, but also has a low dose of iodine in it, so that you can get your daily need for iodine without having to worry about using iodized salt. And again, so these are 6 really simple things that you can do. I really can't underemphasize this one or overemphasize that one enough, because number 5, which is test. And the reason why is because if you're already doing these things, again, you may not be doing these things yet, do these things first, right? Do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 first. Like, get those really tightly dialed in. And if those are not working, if you're still struggling, now it's time right here. It's time to go see your doc. It's time to get the right testing done so that you can get the right information. So before I get into your questions, I'm just going to draw in very quickly. I've done deeper videos on this topic, but again, I think it's important to plug this in. So in order to produce T4, this requires iodine, right? We said that already, but the T is an amino acid called tyrosine, and a lot of vegetarians have diets that are low in tyrosine. So if you're vegetarian, this is one of the things you might consider supplementing with. It's also something you can do. I'll ask your doctor to test. So tyrosine and 4 molecules of iodine equals T4. Now, in order to put the tires on, remember I called the iodine tires before, right? In order to do that, that requires vitamin B2, and it also requires vitamin C. So in order to attach the tyrosine to the iodine, you need vitamin B2, you need vitamin C. To convert T4 to T3, that requires selenium. Selenium drives those enzymes that take away iodine, so selenium is very important, and this is actually one of the reasons why I was talking about earlier why mycotoxins can disrupt thyroid hormone as well, because selenium recharges the liver. It regenerates glutathione, which is what the liver uses to detoxify from mycotoxins. So if your body is so overwhelmed by mycotoxins, your liver will sequester selenium to build more glutathione to help with that. So selenium is very important in both the liver, but also in conversion of T4 to T3. Then once we come down here, I mentioned vitamin D and vitamin A earlier, but you also need, in that final step of conversion, you need omega-3 fats in order to properly rev up the metabolism. So again, basic diagram on the nutritional components revolving around thyroid, and that should answer your question. I think somebody asked me a question earlier, what's the difference between Hashimoto's and just hypothyroidism? Hypothyroidism generally is these things are happening and there's nutritional deficiencies, and so that's hypothyroidism of a non-autoimmune origin. And then there's autoimmune thyroid problems like Hashimoto's, where there's an actual immune response that's damaging the mechanism behind how we produce thyroid hormones. So again, that's it in a nutshell. Hey, and if you missed the earlier part of this series, click right here so you can go back and get caught up. The information there might be critical to helping you on your path to better health. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe for updates below. Have a great day.